When I left town for a few months, I never imagined the HOA would go this far. I thought maybe they'd send me a couple more ridiculous fines about the paint on my shutters, or another angry letter about my Harley being too loud for community standards. But what I came back to wasn't just another petty squabble. No, what I returned to was a jaw-dropping sight that almost made me crash my truck as I pulled into my own driveway. There, right on my land I had worked hard for, paid taxes on, and owned free and clear, stood a brand new building. Not a shed. Not a clubhouse. A hotel. A real 3-story brick and glass hotel with a glowing "Coming Soon" banner strung across the front. And the craziest part? The HOA had built it. I sat in my truck, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the monstrosity like I was in some kind of fever dream. Guests were already walking in and out. Cars filled the brand new parking lot. I could even see a lobby desk with a bellhop standing there like this was some kind of resort. I thought, there's no way this is real. This can't be my property. But deep down, I knew exactly where my land ended and where it began. And that shiny hotel? It was smack dab in the middle of it. I got out, slammed my door, and the first person I saw was none other than Karen, the self-appointed queen of the HOA. She was strutting across the lot like she owned the place, clipboard in one hand, phone in the other, barking orders at contractors and pretending to be the boss of the world. "Karen," I shouted. She turned, sunglasses perched on her nose, and gave me that smug little smile I'd come to hate. "Oh, you're back," she said casually, like I was some kind of nuisance interrupting her business. "We've taken the liberty of upgrading the community. You should thank us. Property values are going to skyrocket." "On my land." I barked back. Karen tilted her head, smirked, and said, "Technically the HOA can designate land use if it's in the community's best interest." I laughed so hard I nearly doubled over. "Karen, that's not how land ownership works. You can't just steal someone's property because you think it looks good for the neighborhood." She didn't even flinch. Instead, she leaned in and whispered, "You weren't here. You abandoned it. We voted and now it's ours." That's when I realized this wasn't just arrogance. This was a full-blown power grab. They thought because I was gone for a few months I'd forfeited my rights. And instead of mowing my grass or sending a maintenance notice, they built a multi-million-dollar hotel. So I marched right up to the hotel doors. The security guard tried to stop me, but I shoved past him and walked straight into the lobby. Everything was brand new, marble floors, chandeliers, check-in counters. It looked like something out of Vegas, except this was supposed to be my quiet little neighborhood. I walked up to the desk and asked the clerk, "Who owns this hotel?" She smiled politely and said, "This property is managed by the HOA Hospitality Group. Do you have a reservation?" I nearly exploded. "Reservation? Lady, this is my land." Of course she didn't believe me. Nobody in the lobby did. To them I was just some angry guy making a scene. But I knew the truth and I knew I had the paperwork to prove it. I stormed out, grabbed the thick folder from my truck that contained my deed, my tax records, and every scrap of documentation I'd ever saved. When I shoved it in Karen's face, she barely glanced at it. "Paperwork," she sneered. "You think a piece of paper matters? We have investors, contracts, and permits." That's when it hit me. The HOA had conned developers into thinking they controlled this land. They'd faked authority, presented themselves as decision makers, and tricked real companies into pouring money into this project. But because they built it on my land, all of it, all the contracts, all the structures, all the profits, legally defaulted to me. Karen had essentially gifted me a multi-million-dollar hotel without even realizing it. But here's the thing, I didn't tell her that. Not yet. I wanted her to sweat. I wanted her to believe she had won, that she had crushed me, that her precious HOA had finally gotten rid of me. Because when the truth hit her, it was going to hit her hard. Over the next few days I played it cool. I walked the property line, spoke with contractors, and quietly collected evidence. Some of the workers even slipped up and admitted they thought I was the owner. They'd been confused from the start about why an HOA president was acting like she ran a construction company. That confusion was about to be the nail in her coffin. Meanwhile, Karen strutted around like a peacock. She threw a grand opening preview party, invited half the neighborhood, and even put up a banner with her name on it. Presented by President Karen of the HOA. She was treating the whole project like her personal empire. People clapped, drank champagne, and took tours of the fancy new rooms. But behind the smiles I saw the doubt. Some neighbors whispered. Some frowned. Some shook their heads. They all knew something felt wrong. And wrong it was. Because the very next week I made one phone call. Not to the HOA. Not to Karen. To my lawyer. I laid everything out: the deed, the construction, the fraud. He didn't even let me finish before saying, "They just handed you the biggest case of your life. Congratulations, you own a hotel now." And that's where the real fight began. The morning after my lawyer dropped that bombshell, telling me that, legally, everything the HOA had built on my land was now mine, I woke up feeling like I was living in some kind of dream. Except this wasn't a dream. This was real. The HOA had spent months funneling money, energy, and resources into a project they thought was theirs. But all they'd done was gift wrap a multi-million-dollar hotel and drop it in my lap. Still, I knew Karen wasn't going to just roll over. People like her don't accept reality easily. They fight, they scream, they manipulate, and they drag everyone else down with them. If I didn't handle this carefully, she could tie things up in legal battles for years. That's exactly what she wanted: to wear me out, to bury me in paperwork until I gave up. But this time I had no intention of backing down. So, my lawyer and I drew up the first step: filing a formal claim of ownership with the county registrar. That meant walking into the government office with my deed and showing proof that the land under the hotel was indisputably mine. The county official raised his eyebrows as he scanned the documents, shaking his head slowly. "You're telling me," he said, "they built an entire hotel without securing the land rights first?" "Exactly," I replied. He chuckled under his breath. "That's a first. I'll process this today. Legally, the structure goes to you as the rightful landowner. They're in for one heck of a surprise." And just like that, it was official. On paper, the hotel was mine. But I didn't announce it to anyone yet. I wanted Karen to keep digging her own grave. That weekend, the HOA held a grand ribbon-cutting ceremony for the hotel. I showed up, standing in the back with my arms crossed, watching Karen parade around in a suit she probably bought just for the occasion. She had balloons, photographers, and even a little stage where she gave a speech. "This is a historic day for our community," she boasted into the microphone. "Thanks to the hard work and leadership of the HOA, we now have a luxury hotel that will bring prosperity, prestige, and value to our neighborhood." The crowd clapped politely, though I could see the unease on some faces. Neighbors were whispering, glancing at me, probably wondering why I looked so calm. I let her bask in the spotlight for a few minutes before walking right up to the stage when she was done. "Great speech, Karen," I said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Only one problem. You built this on my land. Which means, you built this for me." The silence that followed was deafening. Karen froze, her smile faltering. "Excuse me?" she stammered. I held up a thick folder, the stamped, certified documents from the county. "I'm the owner of this land, which makes me the owner of this hotel. Every brick, every chandelier, every dime spent, belongs to me now. And I've already filed the paperwork to prove it." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Karen's face went pale, then red, then twisted into fury. She grabbed the microphone again. "That's a lie. This hotel is HOA property. We voted." The lawyer I had brought with me stepped forward and raised his voice. "Votes don't overrule deeds, ma'am. You built on private land without consent. This man owns the hotel now. You and your board just committed one of the dumbest blunders in HOA history." Neighbors started murmuring louder, some even laughing. Karen looked like she was about to combust. She tried to rally, shouting about permits and contracts, but the investors who had funded the project were already pulling out their phones, calling their lawyers. One of them, a man in a sharp suit, stormed over to Karen and hissed, "You told us you had the rights. You said the land was HOA controlled." Karen tried to stammer some excuse, but the man shoved past her, clearly furious. One by one, the so-called partners who thought they were tied to Karen's grand project realized they'd been conned. They glared at her, not me, because they knew who the real fraud was. And that's when the chaos truly began. Within days, lawsuits rained down on the HOA. Investors filed breach of contract claims. Contractors demanded payment for unfinished work. Guests who had booked stays demanded refunds. And the HOA? They didn't have the funds to cover any of it. At the next board meeting, which I attended purely for entertainment, Karen tried to spin the situation. "We've encountered a minor legal misunderstanding," she said, sweating through her blouse. "But rest assured, the HOA will prevail." A neighbor shouted from the back, "Karen, you said this hotel would lower our fees. Now we're all being dragged into lawsuits." Another neighbor stood up. "You tricked us. You spent our money without consent." The room erupted in shouting. I just sat there, leaning back, arms crossed, watching Karen lose every ounce of control she thought she had. The board members looked panicked, some even distancing themselves from her, claiming they had no idea what she was doing. But emails surfaced, Emails my lawyer obtained through discovery that showed they were all in on it. They had signed off on Karen's scheme thinking they'd cash in on hotel profits. Instead, they were looking at bankruptcy. Meanwhile, my lawyer and I were working behind the scenes to solidify my ownership. Not only did I get the land and the building, but when the HOA defaulted on payments, parts of their accounts and assets were seized. The judge even hinted that I could pursue damages for trespassing, illegal construction, and harassment. Karen, of course, tried one last desperate move. She marched up to my house one evening, pounding on the door like she owned the place. When I opened it, she was trembling with rage. "You think you've won?" she hissed. "You don't deserve that hotel. That was supposed to be my legacy." I smiled. "Your legacy is fraud, Karen. And it's going to follow you all the way to court." She screamed at me, called me every name in the book, and stormed off. But the truth was, she was done. The HOA was collapsing. The board members were resigning left and right. Neighbors were voting to dissolve the HOA entirely. And me? I was already signing contracts with legitimate hotel management companies to start running the place for real. The irony was delicious. Karen had tried to use the HOA to take me down, but all she'd done was make me a hotel owner. Her attempt to crush me had turned into the biggest backfire I'd ever seen. And the final blow? At the next neighborhood gathering, when she tried to speak, people booed her off the stage. She wasn't feared anymore. She wasn't respected. She was a punchline. But my story with Karen wasn't over yet. Because the real fireworks came when the federal investigators got involved. By the time the dust settled after the lawsuits, the HOA was hanging on by a thread. The investors had abandoned them, the neighbors had turned against them, and most of the board members were desperately trying to pin everything on Karen. But Karen wasn't the type to accept blame. No, she doubled down. She started sending out newsletters claiming I had stolen the hotel, accusing me of manipulating the courts, and warning the community that I was a danger to their property values. It was laughable. Every letter she sent, every meeting she tried to hold, every rant she screamed at passing cars just made her look more unhinged. And the best part? None of it mattered. Legally, the hotel was mine, the HOA was broke, and the neighborhood was slipping out of her grasp. But then came the twist she didn't see coming. One afternoon, I got a call from my lawyer. He sounded almost giddy. "You're going to want to hear this," he said. Turns out, some of the money Karen used for that hotel project wasn't just HOA dues. She dipped into federal grant money that was meant for community safety improvements, street repairs, lighting, that sort of thing. My jaw dropped. "You're saying she embezzled federal funds?" "Exactly," he replied. "And the Department of Justice is very interested." That's when I realized the game was truly over for her. Because it's one thing to play fast and loose with HOA funds. It's another to defraud investors. But to embezzle federal grant money? That's prison time. Sure enough, a week later, black SUVs rolled into the neighborhood again. This time there was no ribbon cutting, no balloons, no speeches. Just agents in suits walking straight up to Karen's front door with warrants in hand. I was standing outside the hotel when it happened. Neighbors peeked through curtains, some even came out onto their lawns, whispering nervously. And then we all saw it, Karen being led out in handcuffs, red-faced and screaming about how it was all a misunderstanding. "They can't do this to me. I'm the president of this community," she shrieked. The lead agent calmly replied, "Ma'am, you're under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and misuse of federal funds." Her knees nearly buckled. They shoved her gently into the back of the SUV as the whole neighborhood watched. People who had once feared her were now shaking their heads, whispering things like, "About time," and "She had this coming." And just like that, the HOA dictatorship crumbled in real time. With Karen gone, the board collapsed entirely. The neighbors held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to dissolve the HOA. No more fines. No more harassment. No more Karen. For the first time in years, people felt free. As for me, I was suddenly the owner of a luxury hotel. It wasn't something I'd ever planned, but I wasn't going to waste the opportunity. Within weeks, I had partnered with a legitimate management company. They rebranded it, staffed it properly, and began running it like a real business. Bookings rolled in, profits started flowing, and the entire community benefited from the new tax revenue. Ironically, Karen's insane power grab ended up boosting the neighborhood in the best way possible, just not the way she wanted. But let me tell you, the sweetest moment of all came a few months later. I was walking through the hotel lobby, checking on renovations, when one of the contractors approached me. He laughed and said, "You know, this has to be the biggest HOA fail I've ever seen. They built you a hotel for free." And he was right. Every chandelier, every tile, every piece of furniture, all of it paid for with money Karen illegally funneled. And now, every dollar it earned went straight into my pocket. The neighbors loved it too. They'd come by to eat at the restaurant, hold parties in the event space, even put up family when relatives visited. People who used to avoid me, afraid of Karen's wrath, were now shaking my hand and thanking me for standing my ground. And Karen? She wasn't around to see any of it. Last I heard, she was awaiting trial, facing years behind bars. Her legacy wasn't the fancy hotel she dreamed of, it was being the HOA president who lost everything because she let her arrogance blind her. I'll never forget the day I stood outside that hotel, looking up at the glowing sign with my name on the ownership papers. I thought back to the moment I first pulled into the driveway, jaw dropping at the sight of a hotel standing on my land. Back then, I thought it was the biggest nightmare of my life. But in the end, it became the biggest one I could have ever imagined. So here's the lesson. If you ever deal with an HOA bully who thinks they own you, remember this. Paperwork doesn't lie. Deeds don't bend to intimidation. And sometimes, the harder they push, the harder they fall. The HOA tried to build their empire on my land. But when the dust settled, I was the one standing tall, and Karen was nothing more than a cautionary tale. Enjoyed the story? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share.